Hello and welcome to the HiberNation. I am so excited to be journeying with you this autumn and winter. It's going to be really, really magical. And I feel very honoured that you're here joining me. This little video is going to be our first one. We're going to be learning about our animal guide for this early autumn period, who is Squirrel, which is really exciting. We're going to be tuning into Squirrel and what they can teach us about how to navigate this time of year, how to make the most of that magical abundance that's around us right now, and how we can kind of keep some of that to keep us going as we get into the leaner, colder and darker months. And then we're also going to be looking at the new moon, which is coming up, and how to do some intention setting and some ritual to connect us with the moon as a way to journey through this time, these seasons as they shift and change. The moon can be a really powerful presence, particularly as it gets colder and darker and she's around a lot more. So that's our aim for this first video, is to introduce Squirrel and get into some really magical intention setting. So let's start tuning in to Squirrel. And before we start, I wanted to share a bit of thinking around how we view animals, because there's not just one way to view them at all. We have all these kind of multiple lenses that we see them through. And I feel like that's an important starting point, because we get to choose for this particular journey how we're going to be viewing the animals that we're going to be working with. So I've got like a little list of some of the different ways that we can view and interpret animals. There's obviously the biological level. It gets quite scientific. There's all the stuff around their classification, their DNA, their physical being. If we were going to talk about a museum or a zoo, that's where you've got like the physical animal, their body. And then you've got the behavioural side, which can also be very scientific, what they do, how they interact with each other, how they behave in a wild setting versus somewhere like a zoo, how they have adapted to us and our presence. Then you've got conservation. So this is where part of my background is in, and this is how the animals are getting on in the wild, how they are facing threats, how they're adapting to those, how they exist within an ecosystem. So with squirrels, it's the forest or the park or our garden, the whole area that they live and the place that they particularly play in it. Interestingly, you've then also got the animal rights side, and that's quite a different vibe to conservation. So they both have a concern for the well-being of animals, but within the conservation setting, that's about the species level. It's about how the animal as a whole across the whole planet is getting on. Whereas from an animal rights view, you're thinking about individual animals. How is that particular squirrel getting on? How is it being treated? So I kind of traverse both of those frames, and sometimes there can be a bit of conflict there, which is an interesting one. We've got a frame around, are they domestic animals or wild ones? Can we eat them? Are they considered food? And that's a very personal one. I've learned we've all got very particular frameworks, haven't we, in our minds around whether that animal can be eaten or not, whether it's a pet or not. The law comes into that in some ways as well, that certain animals get different protections and different rights, again, to other ones. And then we get into some of the more human angles. They're all human, but these ones are kind of more obviously to do with us. So there's anthropomorphism, where we put human characteristics onto animals. We kind of have an assumption that maybe they are like us. They're sort of like little fairy people. On this one, I've got some interesting views. So, conservationists and the kind of scientific community get very twitchy about anthropomorphism. They don't like the idea that we are interpreting the behaviour of other animals to mean that they're like us in any way. And for me, there's good anthropomorphism and bad anthropomorphism. There's anthropomorphism that can mean that you've maybe put your dog in a jumper, and I have to say that I do this sometimes, but you're maybe treating an animal as if it's a person, and you're not respecting that animal and what they actually need or desire or what would make them safe or happy. You're kind of assuming a lot on their behalf. And then there's good anthropomorphism, which for me is around recognizing that all animals have their own personality, their own way of interacting with the world. And it's very possible that we will never understand it. We'll never really know what it's like to be a squirrel because we're never going to be in their particular body with the way that they see colours or the way that smells appear to them. But it feels important to me to recognise that even squirrels, even bees or different types of insects, even animals that seem really, really small, they are having this unique experience of the world. And I find that really fascinating. And I think it then links onto the next couple of ways that we can see animals, which is in a mythical sense, how they appear in our stories, our films, our folk culture, how we combine, I think, a bit of anthropomorphism, that's a hard one to say, with some of their natural behaviours and things that they do. And then another level of the kind of like the metaphysical level, the idea that they have a spirit or an energy and a particular archetype that they kind of represent to us, which again, yeah, is this kind of like interplay between how we see them and how we're interpreting their behaviour and the things that they do, and how they naturally are and how they get to express their natural ways of being. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of start with that point of when we're talking about squirrel, what layer, what lens are we talking about it from? And then that's like a bit of a springboard into starting to tune in to squirrels and what we can learn from them. So we're going to start tuning into Squirrel now and moving through some of these different layers. So I wanted to just start with some kind of facts. There's a lot more that you can learn about them if you're a fact person. So their name means shadow-tailed, which I just think is really beautiful. They've got that fabulous, soft, fluffy tail. There are about 258 species of squirrels all over the world, I think, except Australia. And there are pygmy squirrels, giant squirrels, flying squirrels, ground squirrels, and tree squirrels. So like there's a lot. When you start looking at squirrels, like there's a lot. But we're going to be particularly focusing on tree squirrels and their relationship to the forest, because that's where there's some learning for us as we move into early autumn. So there were 100 species of tree squirrels alone. And I wanted to talk about, I'm going to talk a bit from a UK perspective, but I would really encourage you, if you're not in the UK, to learn about the squirrels near you. What species have you got? Who is living in your garden or your parks or your forests? And go and do a bit of Googling. Go and watch some videos. Look at how they move and their colours and really tune into them. And I'm going to talk about the two particular species that we have here in the UK. So here in the UK, we have red squirrels and grey squirrels. And there's a little bit of a story around them and some tension between them. So I just wanted to touch on that first. So grey squirrels were introduced to the UK by people, and red squirrels were here already and have been here for a very long time. And grey squirrels are described as an invasive species, which seems a little bit unfair because it's not like there's a big squirrel headquarters where they've got a big map and they're plotting where they're going to invade next. You know, they were brought here by people, and because they are very adaptable, they adapted and they have done very well. They cope pretty well with urbanisation and the fact that there are people around them. And what's interesting is, from a conservation perspective, there's been this story that it's the fault of grey squirrels that red squirrels are not doing so well. So I just wanted to do a little bit of research on that, and that doesn't seem to be true. Of course, the biggest threat to red squirrels isn't grey squirrels, it's people. And there's a kind of accidental and a deliberate conflict here. So sort of accidentally, sort of mindlessly, we've caused habitat loss for red squirrels. We've changed how the forests work through kind of mismanagement. We've also, in that mismanagement, hurt squirrels by doing sort of management at the wrong time of year. We've fragmented up habitats, which means kind of cutting through them and separating them with roads and things like that. We've encroached on their habitat with ours, and our pets eat them. So it's another issue. So there's that sort of mindless, accidental eroding that's happened. And I'm imagining it's not just squirrels in the UK that have had these impacts. And then there's also the deliberate side. So one of the things that's quite shocking in the UK is that a lot of the species that we consider precious to us, and that a lot of them that are wild and now in decline, were deliberately hunted almost to extinction because at some point they were decided to be pests or vermin. So I'm doing this with my fingers a lot because here's another frame, here's another interpretation that humans can put onto animals, that some of them are pests to us, generally to us. It's kind of how it works, isn't it? So they were deliberately hunted, like to the very, almost to the brink of extinction within the UK. And most of the red squirrels that we have now, and they're in kind of like little pockets of populations, are descended from red squirrels that were reintroduced from other parts of Europe. So, you know, who's the invasive species really? As the red squirrels were plummeting, people looked to other parts of Europe where they had good populations and they were like, quick, let's bring them back. So it's this kind of strange tension here in the UK around the species that we claim to now love. And there are sort of BBC nature programmes will be like celebrating, look, we've seen a red squirrel, when, you know, a couple of 100 years ago, people were getting rewarded for just hunting them completely. So it's this interesting path that we're on. So let's, having kind of laid that one to rest a little bit, there's not really this war going on between red and grey squirrels. It's something else. Let's move on a little bit to the spirit of squirrel, the more mythical, archetypal side of these animals. So we're going to start tuning in now to what squirrels can teach us about early autumn, how we can adapt better to the changing seasons, how to make the most of the natural abundance that's happening right now. Because it feels early to be talking about hibernation. Here in the UK right now, it's actually really warm, but when you walk through the woods, there are acorns everywhere, there are hazelnuts everywhere, elderberries and rose hips. There's this kind of beautiful abundance. It's like the harvest is happening. The larders are full or becoming full, and that's kind of what squirrel embodies for me, and that's why we're starting with them on this journey. They've got some pretty good skills for this time of year, and we're going to learn a little bit more about them. So one of my favourite things about squirrels is their determination. If you've ever put a bird feeder in your garden, it's pretty likely that squirrels are going to turn up and use it as well. And they have these magical feet. So the back feet of tree squirrels are adapted so that they can hang upside down. They're incredibly flexible, and they can almost kind of turn them backwards. So you see squirrels kind of hanging from trees and bird feeders. And there is almost nothing that they won't do to get to the bird feeder. I don't know if anyone has actually made a properly squirrel-proof bird feeder yet, because it's, they're very good problem solvers. So they've got this determination that they're going to get the thing that they want, and then they've got this incredible ability to problem solve and plan the route and figure out and solve the puzzle of how they're going to get what they want. So that is a gorgeous quality to be bringing in to our hibernation, and we can work with that in our intention setting. Another thing that squirrels are, of course, known for is hoarding. So all this gorgeous abundance in the forest right now, the squirrels are making the most of it. And I think they're eating quite a lot of it from what I've seen. But then they also have this ability to stash things and save them for later, which is remarkable. And they have these incredible sort of ability to make a mental map and remember where they've created little holes and stuffed acorns in them. So they've got this amazing forethought is happening, which not all animals manage to do, of an instinct is kicking in right now for squirrel, where yes, it's abundant now, but I know it's not always going to be like that. So I'm going to start saving and squishing away what I can now, so that when it gets leaner, I know that I've got food. So that forethought is a really interesting thing. There's a level of organisation. There's a relationship to your surroundings and the ability to make a mental map and remember things, which kind of feels linked to organisation. They're really clever, which is really cool. So that is another aspect that we can be working with in our intentions and things for the month. And conversely, it's possible that maybe we get a bit too obsessed with hoarding sometimes. Maybe we're keeping everything in, then there's too much of it. So it can be a really good time to also use some of that squirrel energy for tidying up and having a bit of a clear out of some of the things that you don't need, so that you can then have the things that you do need for the coming months. So that's definitely something that I need to work on, is that kind of, not always good to hoard everything. Another thing that squirrels are really clever at is they can pretend to be hiding their stash if they think that someone else is watching them. So if you imagine a squirrel with a nut, they start digging in the lawn, they notice a crow or another squirrel is nearby. So what they do is they oh yeah, I'm just hiding my nut, I'm just going to put it here. But actually they'll hide it in their cheek or something, and they'll move and they'll bury it somewhere else. So they have the ability to deceive, which is an interesting one because it implies that they have the ability to notice another creature and imagine what they might do or what they might be thinking. So that's a whole other thing for the animal behaviorists to be pondering. It's how clever are squirrels in terms of how much they can understand what other animals might do. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? This idea that you could protect yourself by faking it in some way. Oh yeah, I'm just doing this so that you're not going to actually know what I'm really going to do. So you're not going to be able to steal the thing that I need. So that could be something that we work with this month as well. How could you protect yourself? Or are you being too protective? Are you being too worried about other people watching you? So it's an interesting little extra bit of squirrel energy to work with. And possibly my favourite and most important one of the qualities that squirrels have is that they're perfectly imperfect. So they don't remember where all the nuts they've hidden are. And that's really important because that's how you get new trees. So within a kind of idyllic, imaginary, perfect forest setting where there are no humans getting in the way, squirrels would play this very important role of regeneration, of helping the trees get their seeds to different places, further away than the tree could manage by themselves, which is of course why trees have nuts and seeds. They want to create new trees and they need help. So they make these juicy, beautiful, tasty things that birds and squirrels and other creatures want to eat to help them spread their seed further. So I just love this idea that squirrels are guardians of the forest in a way. They've got a kind of a gardener quality. Yeah, they're planting seeds really for themselves, but because there's this slight flaw in the perfection of their organisation, this slight little chink in their memory, we get to have new trees. And I think that's really beautiful. So one of the intentions or an energy that you could be working with this month is around the seeds that you plant. How could you help the forests? Our forests need our help right now. Trees need us. We are losing trees faster than we're planting them. So how could we be more squirrel in that aspect? So those are just a few of the different energies that we could be working with as we learn from squirrel this month. I've got a little story that I wanted to share with you about my relationship with squirrels, and I'd love at the end of this for you to do a little bit of journaling about any squirrels that you've had encounters with or seen, and maybe set the intention to go and have some squirrel encounters as well. So I've got two little stories. One of them is when I was in a park in Ljubljana in Slovenia, and it's a place where they have a lot of red squirrels. And I was kind of coming from the UK where I've never actually seen a red squirrel. I've seen a lot of grey squirrels. But red squirrels have this kind of almost slightly mythical quality to them because I've never seen one. And I was walking through a park. It was October, I think. It was quite chilly. And I remember seeing this older man, and he looked very smart. He was beautifully dressed. He had a kind of 3/4 length dark wool coat on and a sort of fedora hat. And he was walking a bit ahead of me on the path, and he suddenly stopped. And he got a bag out of his pocket, and he started throwing something on the floor and going, "Pookie, pookie, 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 pookie." And I thought, oh, okay, this is a little bit strange. And then from out of nowhere came about 20 red squirrels, and it was so amazing. And I'm just guessing that he did that all the time, and the squirrels kind of were tuned in to hear the pookie 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 sound and come running. So I can't remember if it was nuts or quite what he had in his pocket, but he was then suddenly surrounded by all these squirrels. And I'd gone from seeing no red squirrels ever to seeing kind of 20 of them at once around this magical guy in a park, and it just took my breath away. It was so exciting and sweet, and I just love to think that there's this lovely man going to the park every day as part of his routine to go and see the squirrels. And I wonder if he has names for them and kind of recognises them. So that was my red squirrel story. And then my grey squirrel story is a lot more personal. And I can't think how old I was. I was kind of like late teens, early 20s. And I was at my mum and dad's house. And we were going somewhere, me and my mum, and we opened the front door to go out. And there was this little baby squirrel kind of on the path. And of course, there's, you don't touch baby animals. You go and see if their mums are around. You don't want to make them smell funny or anything. But I went to the end of the drive, kind of keeping an eye out to see if I could see any mummy squirrels. And by the time I got back, my mum was there with a baby squirrel in her hand. And he was so sweet and beautiful. He seemed to be okay. He was just quite small. And I was a little bit like, oh, Mum. My family is a little bit eccentric around animals anyway. And we had like a lot of rabbits as pets, some guinea pigs. We were always looking after hedgehogs and random dogs that turned up. So we were a bit of a kind of animal-y family anyway. And we took this baby squirrel inside. And he kind of became part of our family for a while. He wasn't ill. We never saw the mummy squirrel. When my dad came home, he came home and had a bath and stuff, and then the baby squirrel curled up and fell asleep in his dressing gown pocket. And we looked after this little squirrel for a few months, and he was so sweet and so cheeky, and he wasn't at all shy around us, so he would climb up your body as you kind of walked into the room to come and perch on your shoulder, and he would steal biscuits and then run up the curtains to hang upside down and eat them and kind of drop crumbs onto your head. And so we think what happened was that he had a slight problem with his teeth, and that he ended up being rejected by his mum because of it, because they grew and grew and grew. And normally for squirrels, what happens is they've got these kind of very strong, amazing front teeth that are constantly growing, and so they're constantly grinding them down. But he had a bit of a problem with his, and it didn't quite work like that. So sometimes my dad would do squirrel dentistry and help him out with pliers and stuff, and he totally tolerated it, and he would come to my dad for help. And one day my mum went out into the garden with Squig, we called him Squig, sitting on her shoulder. And he started to get braver and would go and explore the garden and go and bounce around the fences and then come back. And then the periods that he was kind of off my mum's shoulder got longer, until he just kind of went back to go and live in the wild. And he would occasionally turn up when he needed his teeth fixing, and my dad would help him, and then he'd go back off to be a squirrel again. And yeah, it was just this really kind of magical, slightly bonkers thing that happened to my family that meant we got to live with a squirrel for a little while. So I think that's why I do have this kind of like slight affection for them, because there's something very special when you get to hang out with an individual animal like that and have a relationship with them. Yeah, it just, you get to learn about them and become friends with them in a whole different way. So that's one of the reasons why we've got Squirrel included in our HiberNation program. So yeah, I'd love to give you a little journal prompt now to go and do some writing, or you could do some voice memo notes if that's easier for you. What qualities do you think of when you think of squirrels? List some words that sort of spring to mind. They can be positive or negative. I mean, I'm obviously very squirrel positive, but I know not everyone feels the same. And start thinking about any encounters that you had with squirrels where you actually got to be near them and interact with them and watch them, if you've had, if you've been lucky enough to have any of those encounters. Or you can go on a little YouTube binge and watch some squirrel videos to really start tuning in. And the question is, where could you be more squirrel or less? Is there somewhere that you could do with a bit more problem solving skills, a bit more embracing your perfectly imperfect self, a bit more hoarding or less hoarding, a bit more adaptability? Have a little ponder and just play around with this idea, because that's what's going to help you with the intention setting for this moon. Is where could you be a little bit more or a little bit less squirrel, to help you be prepared and help you move through this early phase of autumn. So we're going to be moving on now to thinking about working with the moon and reintroducing ritual into our lives a little bit. So one of the first things that can really help with this is creating an altar. Now, that sounds fancy, but it really doesn't have to be. And I just wanted to share some little ideas around what you could have on your altar, and then perhaps you could change it. I mean, you can change it whenever you want, of course, but perhaps you could change it on each moon to kind of tie in with our themes as we journey through autumn and winter. So one really nice thing, and it's a very squirrely thing, is to have a little collection of autumnal goodies. So little pine cones, beech nuts. I've got some very old conkers. These are from last year. They've gone a bit shriveled. And this is like a little old moomin bowl. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And of course, going and gathering things like this is a really nice way to tune in to the season, as a good excuse to go and explore in the woods, to go and gather some bits and bobs for your altar. A note of caution if you have pets. I've learnt this the hard way. Horse chestnuts, so conkers, are poisonous to dogs, and having a little beautiful little bowl like this is not a good idea if you have a dog. So pick the things you put in it carefully so that they are going to be safe for your pets, and maybe put it out of pet range. Same for small humans as well. If you've got anyone that's likely to put anything in their mouths, just be a little bit cautious around altars and what you put within reach. But yeah, I don't want you to feel like it has to be anything fancy. It's personal. That's the thing, and it's around your intentions and your connection to nature and the kind of more intangible, magical side of nature in the seasons. So whatever you've got is absolutely fine. And, you know, we say altar, but it could be a shelf or a mantelpiece or a little corner in your room. Just kind of work with what you've got and don't feel like it has to be something fancy or perfect. So yeah, I love having little natural objects on my altar whilst being mindful of the dog. Of course, crystals can be really nice. What other goodies have I got here? Candles. I also really love having like little figures on my altar. And this gorgeous lady came from Star Child in Glastonbury, which is like one of the most amazing shops ever. It's just so cool. And she's pretty much always on my altar, actually. I just really love her and kind of what she embodies. But if you have a toy squirrel or a picture of a squirrel, or you wanted to print out something from the ebook for the month, that could be really nice as well, as a way of tying into your intentions and who we're journeying with this month. So yeah, be creative, have a look around what you've got. Charity shops are always good. It doesn't have to be fancy pants. Beautiful spiritual shops. Pebbles from the beach are just as magical in my opinion as crystals. So yeah, see what you can find. So we're moving now into the realm of ritual. And as we're using ritual in this program to set intentions, the key thing that is part of ritual itself is intention. Anything can be a ritual if that's what you decide it's going to be. So this process is very much about you finding what feels good for you and not making it something that feels pressured, not making it something like, oh, I don't have my candles. There should be no stress associated with this. It's around how you can create a special little moment for yourself. And like, you don't need any props for that. It can help, like if you want them, that's really cool, but there's no pressure. Ritual for me is just about an action or a moment that you create for yourself where there's a sense of meaning and purpose and intention. It's not something you're kind of casually doing. You are choosing this moment to make some magic in whatever sense of the word you choose. So with that in mind, I wanted to share a little bit more about this process of working with the moon and how you can make it your own. So what we're doing in this program is working with the lunar phases. So we set an intention on the new moon when the moon is kind of basically dark at this point. And we're going to kind of channel that waxing energy as the moon grows to full. And then the beautiful kind of peaceful energy as she wanes again and goes smaller again back to a crescent and then to dark. And whether you believe in the kind of more magical, energetic side of this or not, it can be really useful to have a time scale. This process helps your intentions, either or both, because you believe in the moon and the energy and the potency that it has, or simply just having a time scale for your intention is really helpful to help it grow and take form. It's not just putting it out there with no time scale. You get this kind of beautiful rhythm, and if all you believe is that's just about the size of the moon, then that works perfectly well. So we set an intention at the new moon, and in the ebook that I've created for this, the welcome pack, there's a bit more information around the phases and little reminders and stuff of the phases and how they work, and a couple of notes of caution around being gentle. So particularly if you're coming through the spiral with me at the same time, and particularly if this is your first time working with intentions or you haven't done it for a little bit, it's a really good idea to be very gentle with yourself. Because if you are releasing something and letting it go, sometimes you might find that you have to feel it quite a lot on the way out. So that can be quite intense. Or if you're calling something in, you've got to go through the process of moving the blocks between you and the thing. And that can be quite intense too. So there's a kind of a note of caution around this first one being a bit of a gentle one. And we phrase intentions as if they've already happened. So rather than saying, I will, blah, 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 you phrase it as I have, or I am, or I see, or it is. So we're working with words in quite a beautiful way, as if what we're intending has already come to be. So that's really beautiful. And you can use the pack in the PDF that I've created. There's a moon intention page that you can write your intention on. You can just keep it in your mind. You could pop it in your journal. You could write it on a piece of paper and burn it as part of your ritual. You could also use an app. There's an app called Moonifest, and you type your intention in there and it holds it for you, and then it has other suggestions for how you could work with it, and also helps you track the phases of the moon as well. So you kind of can look at it and see where in the cycle you are. So it's quite handy. But you can do all of those or none of them. It's up to you. So around the new moon, there's a kind of a 3 days window around the new moon. We set our intention. We phrase it in the present, I am, and then we work with the waxing energy of the moon as it grows to fullness. And that's where it can get a little intense. If you've got something that you're letting go around the full moon, you might be feeling it quite a lot. And then the real letting go phase is in the waning, where it kind of, if you're calling something in, you can be starting to notice the little signs that it's coming and start moving the blocks out of the way. And then in the waning phase, you can just open up gratitude and kind of, it's got a lot more of a kind of peaceful energy to it. And it's a bit of an experiment as well. It's a bit of a way to play with the universe and how it works for you. You can set intentions around your own kind of emotions, around the things that you have or want to manifest. You can also use them, and I really like to include these, to be engaged in social justice or environmental issues. So a bit like we were saying with Squirrel, a really beautiful intention could be something around being a better servant to the trees. Or if you were going more down a social justice route, something around being a better ally. So you can work with these however you want. I would really recommend try saying it out loud or writing it a few different ways to really nail down the words of your intention. And then when you've got them, some kind of process where you seal that as like, that's my intention. So whether you say it out loud or write it down can be really useful. And then creating a little ritual for yourself to do with this intention. So it could be doing a bit of a meditation on it, visualizing this change that you're calling in. It could be, sometimes involving fire is really lovely if that's safe for you to do so. So the idea of setting fire to your piece of paper and watching it burn and kind of the ashes going. Fire and incense can be really lovely as a part of this moment of creating a ritual. So I'm going to give you a bit of space now in this video to hit pause and really tune in to what your intention for this moon is going to be. If it doesn't come like right now, that's okay. It's one of those things that might come at 3 o'clock in the morning or when you're on the bus or driving your car, like, oh, that's it. So tuning into Squirrel as our guide for this process, and the journaling that we've just done around where we could be more or less squirrel, and just spending a little bit of time of like, where would you really like to be in a month's time? How would you like to be feeling? What would you like to be seeing happening around you? Is there some particular physical part of your life that you would like to change? Whether it's moving house or meeting a new partner, how could you include that in your intention? And it's not to say that by this time next month that thing will necessarily have happened. Like, it might have done, and it can happen, and oh my goodness, who knows when these things are coming. But particularly with something like love and romance, in that process it's very much around making space and letting some stuff go and doing the inner work so that you can be like the best possible person when this other person that you're calling in shows up. So I'm just going to give you a little pause to do a bit of journaling and reflecting and calling in what your intention for this moon is going to be. So I've recorded a little guided meditation for you to listen to that's going to help you tune into Squirrel and call in your intention for this new moon. So get comfy and get ready and have a little listen to this, and then at the end hit pause and you can do a bit of journaling or reflecting to suss out exactly what your intention is going to be. So once you have your intention nice and clear, the invitation over the next few days is for you to take a moment to create a little ritual for yourself to set this intention and really kick off the magic. And that can be in whatever form feels good for you. The invitation is there for you to make it your own magic and just play with it. And you can do it immediately at the end of this video, or you can sit with it for a little bit of time if you need a bit longer to get really clear on it. Typically they say there's 3 days around the new moon, which is really good for intention setting. But to be honest, any time really in the waxing phase as we head towards full, it's totally fine to do your ritual whenever works for you within that little time frame. As I said, I don't want us to feel pressured. There's no perfect way to do this. We are very much about embracing the perfect imperfections. So the invitation is there. Go and make a little ritual for yourself. And if you feel brave and want to share and connect, you can come over to the Cocoon Facebook group where we can share what we're up to, how things are going, and any cozy animal videos or photos, whatever you feel drawn to sharing. And we'll get to know each other a little bit more over in the Cocoon.